So I thought we should start with music, and that is Avis Samoutis, the first of his Nicosia etudes. I'll get to Avis gradually. I want to talk a little bit about how my collaboration with Avis and with a number of other composers relates to my slightly idiosyncratic way of being. One thing to say is I have no interest in new music whatsoever. I'm interested in how all music gets to people and making no distinction between new music and old music. And the other thing is I'm somebody who has to make my living by making sure people come to concerts and pay to go to them. And the thing I love to do is to get people to pay to come to a concert who've never been to come to a concert before and love everything because it's new to them, as opposed to coming into a concert with prejudices and saying, well, I like Beethoven, I don't like this new stuff. And there's nothing more exciting than giving a concert with loads of new music and say a bit of Schumann, and someone saying, that Schumann's really difficult, isn't it? But there's an Arcus or the Samoutis, that was fantastic. Schumann I need to spend some time with. That is an experience I have a great deal. I'm going to whiz through some stuff to introduce me to a bit of my practice. This I'm rather proud of. I'm getting to the walking thing. This was on my way to giving the most northerly contemporary violin concert in history last year on the 82nd parallel. Just to say that there are 3,000 people who live on Svalbard, and there were 80 people at my concert, which is not a bad proportion. So, walking became part of my practice as a musician by accident. It was actually composers who pointed out that they were interested in what I was doing, walking, and I'm an artist as well, and gradually over the past decade in particular, composers have got increasingly involved in what I do with pen and paper as well as the violin. So all the drawings are just things from my journals and deal with my normal life. I don't drive in Europe at all. Avis was very surprised to find I did drive at all. I just drive for fun when I'm in the US. So everything is walking. And one of the amazing things about living in London is that, didn't want that to happen. You can walk everywhere much quicker than you think. But I love the fact that if I walk out of my front door, within, say, 2 or 3 feet, I've tripped over Captain Bligh, Judge Jeffreys, Michael Crawford, and as you get further away from where you live, gradually it begins to thin out and it thickens. And I love this kind of oscillation between areas where you can feel the place is peopled, if you like, and places where you have vacuums you need to fill in. I can't say precisely how this relates to practice, except one thing. My wife said to me a couple of days ago, why aren't you bored with the violin yet? Having played it every day of my life since I was 3. Why aren't we bored with it? And I think it's the same reason we aren't bored with quotidian things. No one's going to get bored with a glass of water. No one's going to get bored with trying to get a perfect boiled egg. And for me, that's what I feel about music, and walking in particular is that. We keep repeating ourselves and keep going. I'm not going to play that. One of the other things I wanted to bring up before I get to more music is how do we have impressions of it as we're going? I tend to be a long distance walk. I got my son up to 33 miles for the first time when he was 10 in one day. And so that means you're going at speed, so anything to do with seeing things is often an act of memory. And I wanted to put this up because this was last summer when I was standing about 200 yards from my front door in Wapping in the centre of London, and a kingfisher flashed past me. Now, everyone who's seen a kingfisher knows you don't see it. You just see this flash of orange and blue go past you. And that seemed to sum up a lot of the problem and the challenge of how, as an artist, I work with memory. So a large portion of the drawing I do, and the thinking and the writing about walking that I do is of course memory. This I wanted to put up here because it's very important in my process. This is by Giovanni Battista Viotti. If you want to hear it, if you write Viotti and my name into Google, it'll come up straight away. This was his documentation in 1795 of hearing a Rastafash in the Swiss Alps. And he wrote and he published this booklet about the experience of walking, getting lost, effectively finding himself in a kind of liminal state, and then hearing an outpour for the first time. And this was his, if you like, the piece of music he loved the most, which was a piece of music that he heard and transcribed, and he said he would only play it in the most intimate of circumstances in the hope that he might transport his listeners to the place where he first heard it. The greatest violinist of pretty much of all time, his favourite piece, his most intimate piece, was part of an act of walking. The question of notation is kind of gets us to the question of composers. And this is linked to a project which I've been doing for the past few years with the American composer Michael Alec Rose, walking the perambulation of Dartmoor, the big circle, trying to see what happened. And of course, one of the problems for me was how would I notate it? So I experimented with notating just a cross-section of the walk and seeing if anything resulted from that. It didn't. It was a failed experiment. Of course, if you're walking, weather is everything. My worst experience ever was doing the 32-mile walk from Hampton to Wapping, where I live. And just as I got to Battersea Bridge, I realised I'd forgotten any foul weather gear, and the day was like it was about last night. And by the time I got to Westminster, I was colder and wetter and more miserable than I've ever been in my life. I love that being close to the elements thing. I'm just going to push ahead. Sadie Harrison, who some of you may know, has she and I have had an odd to and fro about the walking question, which is she doesn't go with me, but she responds to the artwork coming from walking. The big question with collaboration is, if you're going to walk with somebody, if you're collaborating with anybody, are they the same as you physically? And she isn't. But so it means that what often happens is she will project things or intuit things from my descriptions or drawings, which may or may not relate to what she does. I want to push on to this. In 2014, where all three of the projects which I'm glossing over today began, I was commissioned by Dover Museum and an organisation called Dover Arts Development, which I do entreat you to look at, because it's all about getting real contemporary art to be part of the community in this very interesting place in Kent. They commissioned me to repeatedly walk from Winchester to Dover along the Pilgrim's Way over a period of 2 years and to see what came out. There was musical results, there were written results, and there was drawing. And this was an odd thing where I was walking near where Samuel Palmer had lived, and I suddenly realised I was by myself, which sometimes is a bad idea, and I became obsessed that he was stalking me, hence the Palmer-esque spire coming over the hill there. Let's just get on. This is all part of that project. I want to go to here. So this is Michael Rose, who I've worked with since we were introduced by George Rothberg in 2004. Michael and I probably disagree about most things about music. Our relationship is very much a fight. and he's terrible to walk with because he wanders off the path the whole time, and you don't walk on Dartmoor with somebody who takes no responsibility for being visible, especially on a freezing cold day in January when he didn't bring any suitable gear whatsoever. And immediately after doing this, I had to go and do a concert in Montfort Church, where I had to apologise and reorganise the programme, so all the first 3 pieces was slow, because I couldn't move my fingers at all. I gave the concert absolutely sodden. This was part of the process. It was fun though. When we work on Dartmoor, we borrow a little cottage. He walks with me in the morning, then goes home in the afternoon. I will do some serious distance in the afternoon, and we meet in the evening. We share a desk, so he's there. And what's going on there? This was actually very exciting. Was that I had a mic on eventually all the time. He's composing there. That's the Ordnance Survey map, one of my notebooks. And I was blogging about it at the same time. The morning after I took this picture, I had 2 emails. One was from a group of school children in Brazil asking me if I'd minded if they did a project about what we were doing right at that moment. And the other was from a poet in Bangladesh who had arranged the words I'd written the day before into a poem. And he wrote a series of poems as we did the first residency, which were flicked over to us as this group of children in Brazil were following it day by day, and did a project about it. We hadn't sought that. I'm a great believer in that things that happen naturally, serendipitously, are one of the incredible boons of how we can work with the web. Who could have imagined this? I couldn't have imagined this. These are just more of the kind of notations I do. These are all Dartmoor pictures, ranging from undergrowth through to a black granite, looking down the Erm River, which became the cover of the CD which we released on Métier last year. And then there's, of course, is the big question of output. What happened was the National Park Authority found out what we were doing, and they asked us to do a project in Montfort Church on the moor, which then I've never seen a whole community turn out for a contemporary music project. And it was all new music. I'd done about 60 large-scale pictures for it, which we laid out on tables so people could pick them up. And at the end of the evening, which was all new music, there was a standing ovation, which anybody who lives in the UK will tell you doesn't happen very often. The British like standing up to leave concerts more than they do to applaud. This is Michael back. He and I walk a lot in Nashville. He's an obsessive geologist, hence the piece of limestone fossil in his hand. And that's concert, but this is no playing for now. I'm going to move on to that. And this is playing Malcolm Rose's work in the Wall of Cyprus, in one of the events or the interventions that Avis and I have been doing as part of our project. I have played in more shopping centres now than I ever thought would happen, and it is a very interesting experience, especially playing in an electronics store. That's quite something. I love it. But the most amazing, funny one was we played in one store in there where everyone was listening except one woman who came up to me and she started nudging me to one side to get to the books I was in the way of. And as she looked away, I saw on her bag, it said, what did it say? It's Stradivari Music Shop. She had a bag saying Stradivari Music Shop. I was playing a Strad, but she wasn't interested. Well, I think that's kind of cool, you know. It's interesting how people are interested, often people who think they know art, don't notice it when it's in their faces, yet somebody who would say, I don't know anything about music, is going to be the person who has the enlightened response. We've all encountered that. So this is Avis doing our thing. There's a term which was coined by the Australian anthropologist Genevieve Bell, deep hanging out. She used it to describe how she was observing, she and I have been friends for 15 years, how do you understand how technology is part of somebody's life? So she would go and live with, say, a French farmer for a week, and then hang out in the kitchen and just not say anything. And she realised, for instance, this was a long time ago, that computers were not made in the way that, say, a mother using the computer will be able to use the computer and still see her kids, because all the wires were in a way that you couldn't have the computer with the wires going that way. And that was a very mundane result of deep hanging out. But what Avis and I are doing here, we're on one of the wrecked buildings along Ermuse Street, just listening, watching, playing in workshops. This actually was very important for a lot of the sonic output. This man's making chopping boards, I think. Of course, if you've had the experience of working alongside a craftsperson, what's amazing is a craftsperson has perfected what they're doing in such a way that they're able to almost dream while they're doing it. They have a way of working with the material which is incredible for an artist to be close to. And of course, the other great thing is that he had work to do, so he didn't need to respond, but stuff did happen. It was clearly, the sonic output from this was a lot of fun. One of my favourite venues near there is a coffin makers. So you go into played in the coffin makers. The most moving thing about coffin makers was not the coffins, but this kind of beaten up bit of plywood which we realised was the mould for coffins. Hundreds of coffins have been made on that. My part of the project is very much responding to the lost 300 years after the 1190s when 1090s when Cyprus became French. That it's in a part of the world where over the past 200 years there's still such a fight as to say within the saying it's the Greek community between the Orthodox notion, the Hellenistic notion, what Patrick Leigh-Fermor would have observed, the kind of pushing away of the complex ethnic background of Greek culture over the past 100 years, plus all of the various add-ons with different West Asian communities. It's really amazing to respond to the bit of history which everybody seems to not notice is right under their feet. The birds of Lusignan, if you like. This is now in part of the great hammam on the northern side, the remains of a typical Languedocian bit of sculpture. And that texture, and for me, that also made a link to particularly female troubadour writing from the 12th and 13th century. I'm not going to play that. This is one of our kind of interventions. If you're a musician, do not tempt fate by playing next to Apollo. It's especially not Apollo with the Kithara here. I played the Shkom next. This was in July. I've never been so scared in my life. And there was quite a lot of people watching this. And seriously, I had a whole Mary Brenner moment. I suddenly understood, for me personally, what the purpose of the sculpture was, which was don't mess with it. This is Avis's music. In fact, no, this is the second of the etudes on a stand in the 18th century chapel of the leper hospital in Bergen 2 years ago. This is at a venue which I've been developing in London, one of the workshops built which provide the parts of the Great Eastern, which is also craft central. So these are concerts where I invite a craftsperson to talk with me in the middle of the concerts. And as you can see, all kinds of local people. That's Roger Redgate sitting there. And that there is the last person who did an apprenticeship in tortoiseshell in the 1940s. So it's a wonderful kind of cross-section of people. This is this summer. That's Wilton's Music Hall playing Avis in July, and that's a week and a half ago on stage in River Falls, Wisconsin. This is Monday. Also playing Avis's music on Luca Alessandrini's quite famous silk violin with a whole group. These are all bio-engineers at the London Design Biennale. And to finish with a possible way forward for the future, this is a project I'm developing with the RSPB back from the Brink project, which is looking at the issue of the Gryllus campestris, the field cricket, which is one of the rarest insects in the UK. And this was walking into a meeting where there was one of the few colonies in the UK in February. So I walked in sort of 25 miles to the meeting, which was at 1 o'clock. And then the whole thing is going to be about how do we respond to this most ugly of instruments, but with the most beautiful of songs, which inspired Gilbert Scott in his Natural History of Selborne, and of course, naturally, John Clare, who wrote about it. So that's a kind of sort of rapid cross-section of some of the things we're doing. I hope that's deliberately disorganized, but just to finish with, this is one of the kind of things which Avis and I do. This was us finding a way that we could play in the neutral zone in Nicosia without the guards noticing us too much. This is actually one of my favourite guerrilla concert films. So I think I should just call it Feed. So if you just go, you just heard the piece, so it's basically. So I don't know if that wins the prize for ignored concert. But my point is, to finish, is this, which is I believe passionately that music is, and all music is an everyday activity. There is nothing special about music making. It should be the thing which happens all the time. I'm passionate about. For instance, I say to my students, when did you last play at your dinner table? And they say, why? And you try it. And play for friends. Sit down. And so I have the thing I was used to do when I was first doing the Bach cycle about 15 years ago. When friends would come over, we'd have dinner, and then they were allowed to call out a number between 1 and 35, which meant any of the movements in the cycle in between courses. And I think that for me is what that's the toughest audience you'll ever get as a performer. So I'm very happy to answer any questions unless you want to go straight on to the next question.
No, we can do that.
Okay. I appreciate the number 5.
Many thanks.
If you're interested, I do recommend this because I'm in it. The Royal College of Art came up with this publication the year before last, which is a group of us, artists, architects, musicians, writing about our practice of walking. And mine is focusing on the Thames, walking the Thames Walk.
Well, integrating art into life, that certainly put us right into the heart of the matter. Who would like to ask Peter a question or offer a comment or anything? It is early in the morning and the conference has just started, and I wonder whether the group is shy. Or it was so disorganized that you can't figure out which question you want to ask. I don't think it was disorganized at all, actually.
Well, I have a very specific question.
Yes.
I was in Nicosia as well last year.
Yeah.
I will talk about it this afternoon, but this place in the buffer zone, were there any people coming along? Did you get any reaction?
Well, there were people around here, but there was, to be honest, the guards were jumpy that day, weren't they? And so they really didn't want us to do it.
Is it Nicosia itself?
Yes, it is Nicosia. It's basically, so you've got the Venetian walls there, and it's the east end as you come around the corner. And we also did an intervention at a cafe just there, which was not a success. I think it's really important to say when you mess up, if something doesn't work. I'm proud of my failures, and they are many. Pretending that things work when they don't is a bad idea.
Okay. Anyone else? Yes.
How did you become interested in this kind of way of music making, like the walking and stuff like that? What was the...
Because I found myself doing it. That's why I said at the beginning. It's also. I'm a bit of an omnivore, and so I found, and perhaps I should blame my wife. My wife is a writer, and she's incapable of not being who she is as an artist at any moment. And that she's a very playful person, but it means that everything becomes fuel for the fire, pran, in the kind of yoga way of looking at it. So when we walk together, we walk about 10 meters away from each other, and she has scraps of paper in her pocket, and she writes and puts them in the. And while we were doing one of the projects, she wrote a 30-page long narrative poem, which went into it for a big symphonic monodrama. So I would blame her. She basically said, "You must stop wasting your time. Everything you have is going to be part of who you are, and if art isn't in everything you do, then there's no point doing stuff." So I do have one rule, which is I don't do anything I don't want to do. You can't book me to come and do a gig. If you're going to persuade me to get away from my sofa, it has to be something I'm interested in, which is why I'm here today.
Great. Yes.
And this is a question more for Davis. Like in which way all this process interfere in your compositional technique, or how you thought about the piece?
I think the process that follows Peter is completely collaborative.
Mm-hmm.
So I think it's kind of hard to distinguish where each personality comes in. We have a series of workshops, and I document all these, I videotape all of these, and I review them, and then I come up with ideas, and then Peter tries them out, and then that's how we move forward. And I'm running a series of lectures and I'm able to share them based on that model. And this is something I've encouraged with my students, and I actually brought Peter to do the same thing with my students, and they were so inspired that I thought this is a very good way forward, a collaboration. And I think that when you've been with somebody so many times, I think everything comes into perspective when you compose. So you can't be this composer who just sits on a table and just makes notes regardless of what's happening around them. So I think that it's a completely collaborative work, and it's been, I can't distinguish Peter's contribution and impact in composing. I think it's helping together.
Well, I was very lucky. The first composer I worked with seriously when I was 18 was Hans von Henser. I worked with him as musical assistant. I was sitting at his desk in Knightsbridge one day and working on a big orchestral score, and I said, there should be a horn melody here. And he looked at me and he said, joined, write it in. It was so exciting! And that's the whole point, you know, to get the fingers in between. That's absolutely it. Collaboration is, you know, every great artist will be a collaborator at some level. And knowing where not one person's work starts and finishes is just brilliant. I love it.
Okay, let's segue into you, since there's going to be a link between you two, I think.
That's the plan.
Thanks ever so much.